Boglins definitely, I think, in a way, came more from my experience of working in Dark Crystal. And Maureen and I had done a TV commercial for Banaka. And it was a guy sitting on a stoop watching women go by, and they're kind of ignoring him because he's got this huge pizza head covering his face that had eyes that moved and mouth. So Maureen built the pizza and I built the eye mechanism. And it was Jason Alexander underneath that pizza head. It was when he was a struggling theater actor in New York City and was doing TV commercials. So that's really funny to think back, because I've always wanted to see him again and go, hey, Pizza Head, and see what he would do and see how he'd react, because the commercial never came out. And so we were just, we would get together every once in a while and we would just kick around ideas of what we would do next. And it's just like who at that time thought of, well, what should we do with, it's like we were all playing around with foam latex, and I had been doing it since Dark Crystal. So we were playing around with the idea of creating a little some character using foam latex, and the eye mechanism, adapting one of the eye mechanisms I had designed. So Maureen at that time was, I think, moving up to Ridgefield, and I was still living in Brooklyn. I started sculpting the first Boglin, and I built an eye mechanism that would make his eyes move left and right, and then I made a little mechanism to make his hand contract so you could push it out and grab things, and that was controlled by a lever in his tail. And they never did that because it was too expensive. But they then took what I had designed for the eye mechanism and adapted it to, their own design. But the original one is there. That's the blue one. Some of this is falling off, but you can see this is the silicone positive of the original sculpt of the Boglin. So you can see how much this is like what the work is. And he even had the little, things protruding from the top of his head, but they got trapped in the negative. But that's the original. And his tail is quite long and out here. So it's very similar. And actually, I think of all the toys I've designed that went to market, this is probably the one that's the most similar. Now, this is a later version of the work because he has hair, but it's very much the same in the design style. One of his eyes is out of whack. But
almost adds to the character, though.
Yeah? That is the very first. And then Maureen sculpted some of the small Boglins, and I did some, and then they all went out. Originally, Boglins was shown to Coleco, and they wanted it, but Coleco was going through its demise, and they wanted to add Boglins as a nemesis for the Sectaurs, and the prototype they built was just awful. Didn't look anything like what we had designed. They had added like this dryer hose, to create a neck, and they gave him a body, and you could, like lift his head up off his body, and it was just terrible. It just didn't work. And so we were happy when they decided not to go forward with it. And then Larry showed it to Mattel, and Mattel loved it. They got it right away, what we were trying to go for. And they kept very closely to the original concept. And Maureen's husband, who's a theatrical designer, designed the box, the idea of the cage. So it's always like it was a meeting of minds. Yeah, and when I went to DesignerCon, I took one of the Boglins with me, and it's really interesting because for the most part it's people who are in their 30s and up who remember it because they had it when they were kids. And they were coming over and, oh, Boglins, and I was like, yeah, hi, you know, it's like I was the co-creator of Boglins and all this stuff, and they said, oh, you know, like, and then I would start playing around with it and moving the eyes, and people who were walking by who were not familiar with it were just like looking at it like, what the heck is that, you know? They couldn't believe that, because, you know, it's when you put something, a battery in something, the way it moves is just a repetition, a form of repetition. The fact that with Boglins you could take your hand in it and manipulate its face and move its eyes and make it blink and scrunch its face down and stuff means it was reactive to the person who's in the audience, which was totally different. You know, I don't know like of any other toy that did that, you know. And the same thing with Sectaurs is because you could pounce on things, you could manipulate it yourself. You weren't relying on, you know, it wasn't a watch me toy. Like they always say that's the worst toy you can make, is something that a kid just flicks a button and it moves across the floor because it holds their attention for like 2.5 seconds and that's the end of it. So when I was at DesignerCon, I had that, and this 10-year-old boy walked over and he goes, oh, a Boglin. And I said, how did you know what a Boglin was? He said, I saw your Instagram page. I was like, wow, that's amazing. So it's, you know, it's a totally new generation, you know, finding it. And of course, now they want to buy them, and the only way to buy them is on eBay, and they're outrageously expensive now. So.